So good afternoon, everyone. I have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Max Shmookler to AUB and specifically to the Department of Arabic and Near Eastern Languages. I met Max exactly 1 year ago.
Really?
It's exactly, actually.
Exactly.
As I was a respondent for his paper on Maqāmāt Ahmed Faris al-Shidiyaq at the Middle East Studies Association last year. Max is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian and African Studies at Columbia University. His lecture today deals with the Maqāmāt genre, a topic that many of you know is dear to my heart. So what is Maqāmāt? Maqāmāt is a native genre of fictional Arabic prose literature that has played an important role in Middle Eastern and global literary history. Invented in Arabic in the 4th, 10th century in eastern Iran, Maqāmāt are collections of picaresque tales that narrate the various adventures of a trickster's travels across cities of the medieval Islamic world. Casting the exploits and speech of its characters in flowery language, flowery prose, Maqāmāt tales are often ironic, parodic, and darkly humorous tales which have proven themselves remarkably clever at capturing the attention of medieval audiences, modern readers, and critics. They often mock our aspects of the society or our knowledge and perception of literature, religion, science, and philosophy. One of the most exciting features about this genre of works is its relatively continuous and widespread circulation over time and space. The Maqāmāt, in fact, is one of the longest lasting and widest traveling literary forms in the world. They form a written tradition and network of texts that can be traced across the works of different authors and manuscript traditions. From the Maqāmāt's first appearance in eastern Iran at the end of the 10th century, the practice of maqāma writing spread to most regions of the Muslim world, including Iran, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, North Africa, Al-Andalus, Yemen, northern India, and West Africa. Like the shape-shifting itinerant characters they portray, Maqāmāt works have exhibited a remarkable capacity to travel and transform. Works of the genre traversed linguistic, religious, and cultural boundaries, as writers composed Maqāmāt collections in Persian, Hebrew, Syriac, Ottoman Turkish, and Hausa. Moreover, some modern scholars have posited the influence of the maqāma form in the rise of the anti-heroes of the Spanish picaresque. Scholars of the modern Arabic novel have similarly argued for the important place of the maqāma as a model in the imagination of the first novelists writing in Arabic in the 19th century. So the 19th century, this brings me to Max's lecture for this afternoon. Max's interest in the maqāma began with a curiosity about saja, rhymed prose, in a collection of Sudanese short stories he co-published this year with Comma Press. His dissertation is a study of 4 maqāma collections of the late 18th and early 19th century in Mount Lebanon. Beyond the importance of making these maqāmāt texts, largely unknown texts available to scholars of literary history, Max hopes that his work will help expand our thinking about modern narrative forms beyond the novel and before the Nahḍa. Max's lecture for today is entitled Adab in its own terms, a study of the Maqāmāt of al-Turk. Please join me in welcoming Max to you. Max, I guess you have 50 minutes, 55 minutes, and then we'll leave the room for questions and answers.
Can we negotiate?
We can negotiate.
Great.
56 minutes.
Well, before, can you hear me? Let's start with, can you hear me? Wonderful. Great. How's that? Much better? So before anything else, let me thank Dr. Orfali and all of the wonderful people in the Department of Arabic and Near Eastern Languages for welcoming me and making me feel really, truly at home here. I'm deeply grateful for it. As well as the wonderful folks in the library, the archivists who have really gone above and beyond in helping me to trace and search out various texts and manuscripts. So I'm very grateful for that. It feels actually something like a gift, and as we know, and as I'll talk about, a gift implies an obligation to return. to pay it back. It's never really a free gift. So I've been thinking a little bit today about my talk as a form of compensation for Dr. Orfali's kindness in welcoming me and bringing me here to share this with you. The talk is called Adab in its own terms, but as Dr. Orfali may be getting used to by now, I've changed the subtitle. This happened also last year when we first met. The subtitle is now slightly more precise, Adab as agent. This is a major part of what I'll be arguing today, about thinking about Adab in its agentiveness, in its ability to act in the social world of the late 18th and early 19th century. And perhaps I'll be able to persuade some of you to adopt this way of thinking. Before the advent of literary journals and the reading public, prior to the adoption and adaptation of European narrative forms, such as the novel and the short story, and beyond the reductive Nahḍa-era discourse of modernity and tradition, what did adab mean to those who engaged in it? While I cannot answer this question in any comprehensive way, what I would like to do today is share some reflections on adab in the 11 Maqāmāt of Niqūlā al-Turk. For those who might not already be familiar with the maqāma, and I apologize for repeating some of what Dr. Orfali just shared with you, it is a genre of Arabic narrative prose, or nathr, composed in the pleasing cadence of saja, or unmetered rhyme, and interspersed with passages of verse. The genre originated with Badi' al-Zaman al-Hamadani, as we just heard, in the late 10th century, and spread from the Abbasid hinterlands to the courts of the caliphs of Baghdad, and from there to the farthest reaches of the Islamic world. As the genre spread over the centuries, it attracted hundreds of authors, as Yaakov Hamin Antilla has shown us, as well as many commentators and translators. As it spread, it also poached, as Michel de Certeau would say, styles and topoi from other genres of writing, from the hadith of the Prophet to the bukhala of al-Jahiz, and from history and astronomy to medicine, food, and chess. Each maqāma episode typically revolves around an encounter between a narrator, or rawi, and his clever, eloquent, and often duplicitous companion, the adīb. The rawi not only relates each story, but serves as a witness, participant, and often an unwitting victim of his encounters with the adīb. In al-Turk's Maqāmāt, the rawi is named al-Hazim, the resolute, or firm, or perhaps the stout-hearted. His double, the adīb, is named Abu Nawadir, the father of anecdotes. As we will see, some aspects of these characters are common. They share much in common with the long history of the maqāma. Others, such as the sincerity of the adīb, strike me as quite new. In the classical tradition, the adīb is distinguished by his eloquence and his penchant for trickery and deception. He dons a variety of disguises and adopts numerous identities, from physician to imam to old woman, often employing his eloquence to swindle the narrator and his friends out of a few coins or deceive them in some other way. Some scholars refer to him as the adīb muhtal, to recognize both his facility with adab and his love of trickery, or hil. The Moroccan literary scholar Abdul Fattah Khalito has called him a baligh, or ghator, drawing our attention not only to the character's felicity in rhetoric, or balagha, but also to the centrality of language as an object of both praise and deception in the maqāma. Today we are talking about a maqāma collection composed by an author on the cusp of modernity. So let me say a few words about Niqūlā al-Turk's biography and his place in history, before turning to a reading of his texts. His father, Yusuf al-Turk, was of Greek descent. He migrated from Istanbul to the town of Dayr al-Qamar in Mount Lebanon, where Niqūlā was born in 1763. Although little is known about his early years, numerous scholars have noted that al-Turk's title, Mu'allim, suggests that he worked as a tutor for the children of some of the powerful families in Dayr al-Qamar. We know he visited Egypt in September 1789 to establish connections with fellow members of the Melkite Greek Catholic Church. He was also apparently in Egypt, in Cairo in fact, in 1793, and may have remained there throughout the 1790s. Regardless, Bashīr al-Shihāb al-Thani, the Emir, enlisted him to observe the French observation during their occupation of Egypt from 1798 until 1801. His reports to the Emir were the basis for a historical account of the French occupation, which begins with the death of the French monarch Louis XVI in 1793 and ends with the death of Napoleon in 1821. al-Turk himself remained in Egypt until 1804, when he returned to Mount Lebanon. There he stayed, serving in the Emir's court as a poet, scribe, and companion until his own death in 1828. The court in this period is a fascinating site for thinking about adab. In his study of the pioneers of the modern Nahda, Maroun Aboud argues that Emir Bashīr, and here I'm quoting, revived Arabic adab in his age, motivated by his natural munificence and his ambitions to reinforce his emirate and heighten his reputation. This court, certainly, was crowded with poets, including Boutros Korama and subsequently Nasif al-Yazidi, as well as supplicants and a revolving host of notables and foreign dignitaries. But to identify this court as the site of a revival, as Aboud does, requires evidence that the poets themselves perceived a decline. And it seems to me that the men in Emir Bashīr's court, at least in the first decades of the 19th century, were not concerned about the existential state of adab, nor, it seems, were they driven by the dual desire for progress and reform that came to mark adab and intellectual endeavors more generally from the middle of the 19th century moving forward. One further word on the poet and the Emir. While much of what we know about the Emir's court comes from his poets, Fawad al-Bustani notes one profound absence in Niqūlā al-Turk's diwan. According to al-Bustani, al-Turk never once mentions Jirjas Baz and the sons of Emir Yusuf, who were some of Emir Bashīr's most powerful enemies in the 1790s and 1800s. To understand this absence and grasp the depth and complexity of the relationship between poet and patron here, it is vital to know that Yusuf al-Turk, Niqūlā's father, served Emir Yusuf al-Shihāb. Emir Yusuf ruled Mount Lebanon from 1770 until 1789, when he was replaced by Emir Bashīr, his cousin, who ruled from 1789 until 1840, with a handful of interruptions. While Niqūlā al-Turk served Emir Bashīr, his father remained loyal to Emir Yusuf, serving his three sons and their guardian, Jirjas Baz. The struggle over succession between the two Shihabi cousins, Yusuf and Bashīr, was long and bloody. It only ended in 1807, when Bashīr had Yusuf's sons blinded and executed Jirjas Baz and his main supporters. Among these supporters was Niqūlā al-Turk's father, Yusuf. Neither the man's advanced age nor his son's service to Emir Bashīr were enough to save him, according to the historian Ahmed Haydar al-Shihābi. Yet, as Fawad al-Bustani writes, and again I'm quoting, this painful event did not prohibit the poet, that is, Niqūlā al-Turk, from fulfilling his duties in the court of the Emir. As evidence, al-Bustani points to the substantial number of panegyrics dated to 1807 and the following years. Indeed, the absence of any mention of Jirjas Baz and the sons of Emir Yusuf is a striking testament to Niqūlā al-Turk's loyalty to, or perhaps his fear of, his patron. Reading his diwan, we can say that the father's death is only present in the son's virtual erasure of any trace of the rivalry that was responsible for it. Now that you have an idea of the genre, the author, and the environment in which he was writing, let me turn to the argument I wish to propose. As I hope to persuade you, these Maqāmāt are not only literary texts to be cataloged by genre and analyzed according to their formal features, nor are they solely a remarkable source, as Fawad al-Bustani believes, for the social and political history of early 19th century Mount Lebanon. Not just literary texts and historical sources, but also agents that played an active role in a world of social, economic, and political relationships. To think about adab as an agent, I will consider al-Turk's Maqāmāt as a form of currency, a tool of moral rebuke and censure, and a means to solidify friendship, as well, actually, as a collection of tax collectors. So we'll get to that in a minute. Shawkat Torawa has articulated this concept in his article, Defining Adab by Redefining the Adīb. Torawa uses the example of the 9th century adīb Ibn Abi Tahir Tayfur to expand our understanding of adab in a moment of significant social change, with the introduction of the technology of paper, the expansion of literacy, and the growth of what he calls a middle class in Baghdad. For Torawa, Ibn Abi Tahir represents the emergence of a new kind of adīb, one who could make a living as a tutor, a teacher of writing and reading, a copyist, anthologist, poet, and storyteller. Working in these roles, Ibn Abi Tahir differed from the previous generation of prominent udaba, such as al-Jahiz and Ibn Qutayba, both of whom were reliant on the patronage of caliphs. New professional opportunities, as Torawa points out, took place in new spaces, homes of patrons and fellow scholars, public and private libraries, bookstores in Baghdad's Suq al-Waraqin, and later madrasas. Torawa's approach is not just to provide a social historical context for a new type of literary figure. It is an attempt to think dialectically about the textual and the material worlds, as the German critic Walter Benjamin would say. In a 1934 address entitled The Author as Producer, Benjamin argued that the purported tension between a writer's political commitment to the class struggle and his dedication to the artistic integrity of his work can be resolved only when the problem is considered dialectically. To think dialectically is to think of the text and the world together, committing to their mutual irreducibility. Benjamin applies such an approach to literature, arguing that, quote, for the dialectical treatment of this problem, the rigid, isolated object, work, novel, book, and here we can add maqāma, is of no use whatsoever. It must be inserted into the context of living social relations. For Benjamin, social relations were relations of production under the dual hegemony of industrial capitalism and fascism. For us, the question is how to insert the maqāma into the context of living social relations. To do so, we might draw from contemporaneous historical accounts, such as Hananiya Munayir's account of the Shihabi emirs, entitled Ad-Dur al-Marsuf fi Tarikh al-Shuf, which I've playfully translated as the pearls arrayed in the Shuf's history displayed. But we have another quite interesting source. Each maqāma has an introductory note. These notes include valuable information about when and why each episode was composed, its intended audience, and what effect, if any, it had in the world. It seems they were recorded by the scribes of the 6 manuscript copies upon which Fuad al-Bustani based his 1949 critical edition. And although I will not have the time to discuss them here, we should not forget Niqūlā al-Turk's own historical accounts, one of Napoleon, which has extended passages of Sajā. In fact, at the very moments when the French and the Mamluks are battling, Niqūlā al-Turk turns to Sajā to report on these events. And the other history of Ahmed Pasha al-Jazar, who for our purposes is the patron of the poet that we're studying, because he was the one who granted legitimacy to Bashīr al-Shihabi II. Reading these sources alongside the Maqāmāt, I will reflect on 2 facets of the dialectic of text and world in an attempt to demonstrate their agency. The first such facet is economic. At least 3 of al-Turk's Maqāmāt were composed in order to redistribute wealth. The first 2 Maqāmāt, al-Dayriyya and al-Labnaniyya, were composed for Emir Bashīr, the first in 1804, the second at an unknown but presumably later date. they praise the Emir in exchange for gifts. In one case, a plot of land and a house. In the other, a fur coat and provisions for winter. As al-Bustani reports, al-Turk's diwan is full of such requests. At various points, he composes poems requesting wheat, lentils, chickpeas, rice, cheese, oil, fat, arak, wine, tobacco, and snuff. He even asks for materials to fix a damaged roof. This invites consideration of adab as both a currency to be exchanged for material goods and as a market in which the value of that currency could be negotiated. Decades later, once the value of writing was standardized and its function narrowed by the spread of journals, newspapers, and publishers, the possibility of such negotiations became more limited, a point to which I would like to return later. While the Maqāmāt described above may serve as a site of economic negotiation, the fifth maqāma, al-Shamastaria, is better thought of as a tool for the enforcement of economic regulations. As I promised, a literary parallel to Emir Bashīr's much reviled tax collectors. In al-Shamastaria, the narrator hears the adīb tell a story of meeting a man who planted magical seeds. These seeds grew into full stalks of wheat within half an hour. The maqāma was composed in 1806.